Hey there, this is Tom with the Diogenes Lamp podcast. I appreciate you listening in, and most importantly, I hope you enjoy what you hear. Before we start with today's episode, I'm going to ask you for a small favor. Believe it or not, history podcasts, especially in their early stages, tend not to be cash cows. Shocker, I know. I too was blindsided by this news. Now, I didn't go into this for the money. I think that much is obvious. But unfortunately, books, research materials, and equipment aren't free. Please, go to patreon.com/Diogenes Lamp Podcast, and for less than the price of a coffee once a month, you can become a member and get access to bonus episodes, recommended reading lists and documentaries, shout-outs, and anything else we'll offer in the future as this project grows. If you are especially broke, hey, I get it, but please, make sure to give us a 5-star review when you listen to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and subscribe to the pod on your preferred podcast listening medium. Your support is appreciated, and more importantly, it is needed in order to keep this operation going. On that note, I hope you have a great day, and now back to the show. Captain Michalis stretched out his hand and raised the severed head by the hair like a banner. A wild light haloed his face, which was filled with an inhuman joy. Was it pride, godlike defiance, or contempt of death, or limitless love for Crete? Captain Michalis roared, "Freedom!" and did not finish. A bullet went through his mouth, another pierced his temples. His brain spattered the stones. That was by Captain Michalis by Nikos Kazantzakis. Good evening and welcome to the Greek Civil War segment, the Diogenes Lamp Podcast, episode 15, Battle of Crete, part 2.
Man, so what was that circumstance?
So that circumstance, it's from a book, like I said, in Greek it's called Freedom or Death. Or wait, what's it called? I'm sorry, in English it's called Freedom or Death. In Greek, it's Captain Michalis is the name, but it's from Nikos Kazantzakis, and the book is pretty much about a failed revolt in Crete, because the Turks held Crete until like 1912.
Okay.
So was that like an actual quote, or he was describing what happened?
So that's a quote from the book. The book is about a failed. It's fiction. It's about a failed revolt in Crete. A premature revolt, yeah, where they try to revolt against the Turks and failed. And pretty much this guy, Captain Michalis, is like a total asshole on the island. Like, he terrorizes like the Turks and the Greeks and like pisses everyone off. And then finally, after a while, the word comes from Istanbul that they want his head. So he does like a last stand up in the mountains. And like him and his like nephew are the only ones. He like sends all the other men home, saying like, they want me, don't worry. And like him and his nephew are the only ones that stand. Like that guy's head he's holding was his nephew. So there's a part in that battle at the end where they're yelling. Him and his nephew are screaming to each other. There's no hope. Long live Crete. So they're screaming this to each other. There's no hope. Long live Crete. And Captain Michalis goes, where are you, nephew? And one of the native Turks, because there used to be Cretan Muslims, they were transferred out of Greece in 1922 when we did the population exchanges. So one of the Cretan Muslims said, he's over here. And then he tossed his nephew's head to Captain Michalis. They had chopped off his head. And that's when Captain Michalis raised the severed head of his nephew like a lamp, like in the quote. It's insane.
Man. What's interesting about that quote is at the end, why did they describe his brain splattering on a rock?
Because they had to explain it. That's how it ends. He dies. That's the end of the book. Sorry, spoiler alert.
I guess it's a poetic way to describe his death at that moment.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the
gunshot through the mouth you'd think was like good enough, but the brains hit the rocks.
Yeah, well, he's outnumbered like 50-1. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So you guys shot up. Where we left off last, the few remaining Anzac and Greek forces that practically washed onto the Cretan coast were bracing themselves for the Nazi airborne onslaught. So, shortly after daybreak, the Luftwaffe began the assault with the standard softening up of targets via bombing runs conducting by around 500 to 600 bombers, followed up by another 300 or so of these Messerschmitt 109s that would come in after the bombers to like pepper bullets on anything they could find. Then it was after that final peppering when it started raining Nazis. Like the song, it's raining men, but they're Nazis. The men are Nazis. Kind of like the worst kind. Kind of like the worst kind of men. It's like,
Man. Yeah,
no good.
That's horrible.
Yeah,
Jeez.
the worst. It's like Nazi rain, and then after Nazi rain is like acid rain. I feel like
Yeah. Okay, duly noted. I'll take note of that. That's
it's like acid rain. You can at least take cover somewhere. Nazi rain, I don't know.
it looks for you.
Yeah, it looks for you. It has feet, and stuff, and guns.
I mean, that would be
It
pretty
speaks
terrifying.
German.
Dude, imagine being in Crete and just seeing Nazi paratroopers dropping into your backyard, man.
Yeah, dude,
How
fuck
terrifying that would be.
Absolutely. You could not. I'm sorry.
I mean, jeez.
There are probably a lot of angry, Greek tatas, grandmas yelling at them as they were landing in their yard.
Oh yeah, they were more than just yelling. You're gonna see.
Yeah, from what I understand, they put up like a really nasty fight, and Hitler was like, "I'm done with this place."
In a nutshell, yeah. I don't want you to spoil the whole episode, but yeah, you're gonna see. You're gonna see. So we talked a bit earlier about the main German objectives of taking 3 airfields of Maleme, Rethymnon, and Heraklion, then using those to resupply and reinforce the Germans on the ground. That morning, May 20th, the assault on Maleme's airfield began, with at least 3,000 Nazis dropped in 3 separate locations all around Maleme. Location 1, west of the Tavronitis River. Location 2, east of the airfield itself, along the coast. And Location 3, dead south of the airfield at Hill 107, as it was named. The paratroopers dropped east and south of the airfield were largely annihilated, with only a few isolated pockets remaining. But to the west of the airfield, on the west side of the dry Tavronitis riverbed, some Germans were able to consolidate and form a beachhead of sorts and wait for more reinforcements. So the thing about the Tavronitis riverbed is Crete was having an unusually dry season that spring. So like that river dried up, there was a dry riverbed, and this served as a stable enough landing strip for gliders, which the British were not expecting. Which, by the way, do either guys know what gliders are?
No, actually, I don't.
Well, you Shad, you know what gliders are. Gliders, yeah.
Is that like a term for something, or like an actual glider that they come down on off the planes?
Kind of, yeah. You got it. Yeah, that's kind of it. So, like, gliders are like cheap Fox airplane transports that are towed by other planes and are made with the purpose of being able to navigate a graceful crash landing after being cut loose from the plane doing the towing. So, like, this is useful because unlike men in boxes being dropped from the sky, like the paratroopers, gliders can deliver troops and heavier equipment that can't be provided just by dropping them from the sky. So, like, this is important because when gliders deliver troops, the heavy equipment and the troops, again, they're delivered together at the same time. Not like, hey, I'm going to drop you off over here and the machine gun's over there and the ammunition over there. Have fun finding it all. And, like, that's the big difference between, like, a glider, like, dropping gliders off and, like, doing paratroopers. Also, gliders are engineless. They have no engines. That's, like, the big thing, too. So that's, like, a glider in a nutshell.
Okay,
Tom, it literally, like, I Googled it, it literally looks like an airplane with no motor. It's like a big model airplane.
Yep.
The
exactly.
DFS 230 assault glider.
Yep. There's a really good movie called The Forgotten Battle. Great movie. It's about obviously World War II, about, like, the Netherlands, I think. I'd watch it with subtitles, not dubbed, because it's just weird dubbed. but it's and it has like a British guy in a glider. It has like gliders take place in it and are involved, and it's really cool. So would definitely recommend that movie if you're into World War II movies. So at the same time as Malmö was being attacked, gliders landed west of Sura and south of Hanya. Similar to what happened in Malmö, the Germans had some initial success of overtaking defenders here and there, and at one point occupying the beachhead to the north of Hanya and a nearby hospital. But these successes only lasted for a few moments. The New Zealanders, who we're going to see were especially ferocious like this entire battle, counterattacked and in the process virtually annihilated the German forces, save a few small pockets of resistance that remained pinned down. In addition to all these gliders and troops being dropped from the sky, the Germans really wanted to get some heavy equipment to the island, as in stuff that gliders alone couldn't transport like tanks and heavy artillery pieces. They figured they would requisition some local Greek boats and some merchant marine vessels, and they attempted to send a convoy of about 2,500 troops fully equipped with all the goodies that they couldn't get to the island by air. On the evening of May 20th, the sea convoy set off, but having been tipped off of the approaching Royal Navy by the Luftwaffe, they quickly turned around to avoid a massacre, getting bombed to shit by the Royal Navy, the British. Some Germans, though, tried to attempt one more time about 6 hours after this first attempt, and that would prove to be their last attempt. What resulted was that 4 destroyers and 3 cruisers under the command of Sir Andrew Cunningham literally tore this convoy apart for 2.5 hours, killing 800 Germans. Pretty bad. So the convoy, defeated and devastated, turned around and didn't attempt a sea landing again for the remainder of the battle. They were like, "Fuck this. We're not trying this again."
Yeah. That was the New Zealanders?
That was the British punishing the Germans. Yeah, the British Navy, the Royal Navy. So as much of a victory as this sounds, though, would come at a great cost. The Luftwaffe, seeing the opportunity to punish the vastly outnumbered Royal Navy, would take an eye for an eye, and by May 23rd, losses for the Brits would amount to 2 sunk destroyers, 3 bombed to the point of inoperability, and over 1,000 dead. On that same day, the depleted fleet would limp back to Alexandria in Egypt in spite of a direct order from London to make the sea lanes north of Crete stay open at all costs. Quote, "The operations of the last 4 days have been nothing short of a test of strength between the Mediterranean fleet and the German Air Force," Cunningham reported to his superiors on May 23rd. Quote, "I'm afraid that in the coastal areas we have to admit defeat and accept the fact that losses are too great to justify us in trying to prevent seaborne attacks on Crete. This is a melancholy conclusion, but it must be faced. With no longer the Royal Air Force patrolling the north coast of the island, seaborne landings were now possible, but the Germans, still spooked from their last ill-fated attempt, again, would not try it again. So even though the British left, they weren't going to try it. So back to the land battle and back to day 1, May 20th. Right around the same time that Malmö and Hanya were being assaulted, the Germans encountered another phenomenon that the Italians had encountered in Epirus, but contrary to the Italians, the Germans were getting it to like a way much greater extent. That being civilian participation in the fight. The Cretans were not surprised and didn't live thousands of miles away from the mainland. They knew about the imminent German attack, and they had been seeing and feeling bombs dropping from the skies for months now. So when the Germans started to fall from the sky, and word had already gotten around that these were not friendly forces coming for beaches and good food, well, the Cretans did what they felt they had to do, which resulted in picking up anything sharp or that could kill a man to get in on the action. So Germans were astounded to see locals of all ages, men and women, rushing towards them, and instead of shots of raki, which is like the customary Cretan sacred moonshine, they serve it to guests everywhere if you go to Crete. They received shots from anything that could shoot, along with stabs from pitchforks, scythes, and knives of all shapes and sizes. Many of the firearms used were archaic and borderline obsolete, left over from World War I and the Balkan Wars. So this is the widespread civilian uprising you were talking about earlier, Shadi. Of course, this would never be possible in any normal war setting. And while in Epirus, direct local engagement with invaders happened, it just wasn't as prevalent as it was in Crete. The difference for this, I think anyways, was that Crete was being assaulted with paratroopers. And contrary to what many people think, paratroopers at the time at least were dropped in many cases unarmed or with small arms at most. So like they drop them at most with like a pistol. So like, for example, they'll drop 20 troops over there. A few of them will have sidearms. But any heavy weapons like machine guns are dropped separately. The paratroopers would be able to tell where this much needed equipment was because the chutes would be different colored, right? Have different colors. Heavier guns would be red. Ammunition would be yellow. Like troops would be white, right? So like it made it more possible, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And like none of this is meant to take away from like the bravery of the Cretans, of course, but just to give you an idea of why, more so to give you an idea of like why civilian resistance was so much more widespread in Crete versus in Epirus or Macedonia or like other parts of mainland Greece at the time. Later that afternoon, because remember we're still on the first day, approximately 1,500 men were dropped east-west and directly on the Rhethinon defensive sector, which consisted of the city of Rhethinon and the airfield just east of it. Again, as with Malame and Cagna, these forces sustained ghastly casualties, this time at the hands of the Australians. There was one small pocket, though, that survived the initial drop, that consolidated in between the airfield and the city, and took the initiative to cut the exposed telephone line. Lastly, at dusk, roughly 2,400 paratroopers descended over the southern edge of Heraklion, the capital of Crete, and also were dropped over the airfield itself. A few of the German air forces were able to get into Heraklion, but were stopped by the Greek forces and pinned down, sustaining more heavy casualties. And those that were dropped over the airfield itself were practically annihilated, with some cases of Germans being literally run over by tanks, as this defensive sector actually had a couple tanks and stuff at its disposal.
So a lot of the Germans that were coming in just weren't strapped, so to speak.
Yeah, and they were dropped at like just wrong places, right? Like, you know,
yeah.
If you're dropped like right in front of a machine gun encampment, you're screwed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course. Naturally.
You know, like, and they're taking really significant casualties. Like, they're, from some sources I've read, they were taking 50% casualty rates, which is an insane. That's very high casualty rate. Like 50% is absolutely bonkers. And then, you know, you factor in again, what was that?
The Germans were?
Yeah, taking 50% casualty rates in some cases.
Wow.
Which is, you know, again, insane. And then you factor in that these were the most elite paratroopers the Nazi regime had. And they were being gutted by, like, poorly armed soldiers, zero air support, and the civilian population armed with pitchforks and antiquated guns, right?
Yeah.
So, it's an absolutely terrible start to the invasion of the island. So going into day 2, General Student had to make a decision. Either call off the operation altogether or, you know, try again. Student goes for try again and decides that the only thing that does make sense is to pour more troops into the one arena that had actually shown some signs of success, and that was Malame. At the start of day 2, the Luftwaffe operations, the Germans followed through on their new strategy, and nearly all German paratroopers and gliders were dropped at that western side of the dried Tavronitis riverbed. Having been reinforced with more weapons, ammunition, and men, they were able to take about half or so of the Malame airfield, just enough to be able to land some transport planes all throughout the morning and into the afternoon, in spite of significant fire on the captured portion of the airfield. A New Zealander was quoted as saying, and quote, "No man but a madman would obey an order to pilot an aircraft onto that steel-raked field." You know, he's referring to the German pilots that are, you know, out of their mind, actually landing and going up and, you know, taking off on that airfield. You know, and the airfield was not just that the airfield itself was poorly made and in bad shape, but it was also being contested with bullets and bombs crisscrossing everywhere. You know, so insanity. And these transports were landing, unloading, and taking off again at a rate of as little as 70 seconds. So I'm gonna say it. I think the meth helped. But still.
Yeah. Man.
The meth courage.
That's insane.
Yeah. So I mean, you know, they got that airfield functional for them a little bit. Freyberg, seeing that if these landings continued unabated, it would spell doom for him and his troops, ordered a counterattack to regain full control of the airfield and expel the Germans completely. But the counterattack wouldn't end up commencing until 3 a.m. on the 22nd. Despite a heroic effort, it failed, and the Allies at Malmö airfield, taking fire from both the German soldiers and relentless bombing and machine gun fire from German planes, called off the counterattack. By the 25th, 2 low-ammunitioned, worn-out New Zealand battalions now had to face the gremlin that had evolved into very 5 well-armed and well-supplied German battalions, and by that evening Malmö would be effectively lost to the Germans, who now not only were able to accelerate the landings, but able to secure and protect the airfield. The New Zealanders, seeing all of this, decided the only other option for the time being was to fall back to Hanya and regroup. So it's kind of the beginning of the end.
So they've got their foot basically on the island at that point.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they got one airfield, which is, it's not all 3, but they have one, right?
Yeah, so they're landing everything they need to land, and staging area is just set.
Yep. So while the situation at Malmö was quickly unraveling, the other sectors, while beleaguered, were still standing firm. As late as the 26th, Heraklion was surrounded but still held. Chania had been bombed incessantly, and civilians had evacuated as well, but the city itself also still held. Rethymnon was in a similar position, but none of that would really matter because the moment one of the 3 airfields was taken, like you said, again, they had a foot on the island. So, Freyberg messaged his superior general, Sir Archibald Wavell, on May 27th, who was the commander-in-chief of the British Middle East forces, that Crete had been effectively lost, and that the only 2 choices at this point were either evacuation or surrender. Wavell passed this on to Churchill, who grudgingly approved the evacuation order, and just like in the mainland where everyone made a mad dash to get the hell off, everyone now is making a mad dash to get the hell off of Crete, any way they could. The route Wavell recommended to Freyberg was to book it dead east to Heraklion, where a Royal Navy ship would scoop them, under heavy fire of course, and take them to Egypt. But Freyberg decided instead to go south, and fight along the entire way to Sfakion, a place today called Horasfiakon. So, in all the fighting, retreating, and evacuations, there was one character in her story that we skipped over, the king and his entourage. Remember, they had evacuated from the mainland to Crete earlier. So, by this point in our story, they were already safe and snug in Egypt. On May 22nd, when the air attack on Chania had started, and it became obvious that this was not some half-hearted attempt to take the island, King George II, Prime Minister Tsouderos, the governor of the Bank of Greece, Vavaressos, and the king's cousin, Prince Peter of Yugoslavia, just to name like the quote-unquote important people per se, decided to make their escape. There was no way the Allies could allow the Germans to capture or kill the king. You think about the propaganda value of an event by itself. So their trip off the island would not be any easier than what the troops had to go through, though. All in all, the journey would involve a 3-day hike, which involved sleeping outside in the mountains and relying on the hospitality of Cretan villagers hosting European royalty. The king apparently treated the entire episode like an outing, and by the evening of the 24th, they had made it to Alexandria. The king and the Greek government would live to fight another day.
So at that point, is it basically they most of the battle that took place was just to more or less keep the airfield from getting captured? As soon as that was captured, they basically were like, we got to get out of here.
Yeah, pretty much. Everyone's like, we're screwed. Get the hell out. Everyone's like, we got to get out of here. So, I mean, by the night of the 28th, evacuations had begun, depending where you were. So that night, around 3,500 men were picked up from Heraklion, but the men at Rethymnon weren't so lucky because Rethymnon didn't have the same deep water ports that Heraklion did. So those cruisers couldn't get close enough to the troops in Rethymnon to scoop up the Allied soldiers. They were effectively stranded. When the Germans did show up to Rethymnon one day later, outnumbering and outgunning the defenders, the Germans reportedly shouted, quote, "The game's up, Aussies." Having no way out, Australian Lieutenant Colonel Ian Campbell and 700 of his men surrendered. Some men chose to make a run for it and go to the mountains where they could carry on the fight for a few months until a submarine was able to scoop them. The same day that the defenders had accepted defeat, the Italians, in typical Italian fashion, landed on the island to claim their piece of action. And by action, I mean landing without a single shot fired, in spite of what Italian state propaganda reported. Standard. By the time the final evacuations had been finished, the final prisoners rounded up, and the dead and maimed accounted for, Crete had proven to be extremely costly for both sides. For the Allies, not counting the Greeks, about 3,500 casualties, with roughly half that number being deaths. 12,000 British and Anzac troops surrendered and were taken prisoner. And Anzac, by the way, stands for Australian New Zealand Army Corps, by the way. And another 10,000 Greeks surrendered and were taken prisoner. In the sea, the British had taken quite a beating as well. 9 ships lost, 2,000 sailors dead. Not an insignificant amount when just a couple hundred miles south of Crete, a whole nother theater of war is raging on as well, keep in mind. But as we'll see for the Germans, Crete proved to be an extremely costly venture. This would result in German General Kurt Student memorably calling the island the Graveyard of Paratroopers. Estimates vary, but no less than 4,000 elite paratroopers lay dead, another 2,500 wounded, and roughly 200 of the 500 transport aircraft used for the operation were lost. So, I mean, not insignificant.
A lot of damage. Oh, God.
Yeah,
no.
a lot of damage.
Yeah.
You know.
And for what?
Right. For what? It's like, what was the point? They didn't even have an air force. You could bomb the country. You could bomb the island at will.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Man. They had, like, almost 20... how many prisoners did that add up to then that the Nazis ended up taking in? Like 25,000?
Yeah, 25,000
25,000
plus. 10,000 Greeks, 12,000 British. A lot.
Wow.
There was a big thing, though, was a psychological component to the stiff resistance, because it wasn't expected, nor was anyone expecting civilians to rise up. The casualty rates, too, were extremely high, like terrifyingly high, for the paratroopers. And there are a couple of reasons for these massive losses, but the two biggest ones were, one, Student was under the impression that the majority of the troops had evacuated to Egypt, right? Like we talked about, he thought there were less than 10,000 troops on the island. And reason number two, I mean, I don't know if Mussolini sent his chief of staff or whoever, Prasca, we talked about in earlier episodes, to help plan for the invasion, or if some of Mussolini's stupidity rubbed off on Student and Göring, but the Nazis made the same stupid assumption that the Italians did up in the mainland, and that was that the local population would at the bare minimum not support the defenders and possibly even welcome the Germans. This is what the Nazis thought.
Why would they think that?
So, the big reason why the Germans thought this, and this at least does make... So this is an assumption the Italians thought when the Italians invaded mainland Greece. They thought that everyone would lay their arms down and just surrender. So the Germans thought this, and to be fair to the Germans, this at least does make a tiny bit more sense when talking about the invasion of Crete, was because Venizelos was from Crete, and he was born in Crete, buried in Crete. And the Cretans always voted for Venizelos, more generally for Republican parties, right? So the Germans figured, oh, these guys love Venizelos, which means they hate Metaxas, which was the dictator in charge of the country, which means they'll love us.
I see, like enemy, friend of an enemy.
Right. So, like, okay, like maybe, they hate Metaxas, they hate the royalists, they hate the king. These guys have always been diehard Venizelists. They'll love us, hopefully. In reality, though, like hating, yeah, you know what I mean? But like in reality, hating the Nazis is a nonpartisan affair. The other big thing too, though, like the other big reason why the other reason why maybe the Nazis thought this is there had actually been a rebellion in Crete in I think like 1938. It failed, but like they tried to revolt against the dictatorship, the Metaxas dictatorship.
Oh, I see.
So the Nazis probably thought, okay, these guys really hate Metaxas. They won't resist us because, whatever. But, everyone hates the Nazis in Greece anyways. And of course, we give respect to like the civilian population. Historians have a lot to say about the legacy of Operation Mercury, but the one lasting hangover it left with the Nazis was that it convinced Hitler to never use paratroopers again for the rest of the war. So just a couple months later, in mid-July, Hitler had a celebratory meeting with Student, gave him the Knight's Cross, which is like a fancy Nazi war medal, and then told him, and quote, "Of course, General, we shall never do another airborne operation. Crete proved the days of the parachute troops are over, end quote. Which is crazy, right?
And he never did then?
The Nazis never used paratroopers the rest of the war.
I was reading online, like 350 German planes got destroyed just in the Crete battle, and that depleted the force needed for the invasion of the Soviet Union. So it like directly affected his Soviet invasion. It's crazy.
They diverted a lot of and to Greece in general, the entire campaign, and that's why like the Germans were so pissed that the Italians were such morons and they couldn't finish the job, even though they outnumbered the Greeks so significantly in everything, and they couldn't do it because then the Germans had to bail them out and they had to divert a bunch of resources. Right.
That's crazy, man. Those Greeks, like fearless, man. Fearless.
Yeah, man. I mean, respect. That's nuts.
Yeah.
I mean, could you imagine grabbing your shovel and just like?
Oh, I mean, dude, most populations today would just be terrified and run. You know what I mean?
I feel that. I know. I mean, who knows? We won't know until it happens. But I mean,
maybe not in America, but like America, everybody, there's so many guns out there. It's like invading this country with paratroopers at this point would just be completely useless. Yeah.
Bad news bears. I would not want to be one of the paratroopers. That's for sure.
Right.
Forget that. But yeah.
Now, Tom, you might know though, but wasn't it considered like against the laws of war to shoot a paratrooper midair? I think it was.
No, I don't think it was to shoot a paratrooper. I think you could shoot a paratrooper.
I don't know. I thought I read that somewhere.
It depends.
I gotta look it up now.
Says. Depends on the circumstances. If they're shooting from a disabled aircraft.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like laws to it.
Okay, so if they're like ejecting from their plane.
Yeah, if they're enemy, I think it's fair. They're fair game. So on that note, that's it for today, everyone. Please join us next time as the Germans move on from the task of conquering to administering, and the Greeks get acquainted with their new overlords, the same overlords who will then proceed to organize and execute the seizure of literally anything of value in Greece, from food to bedsheets to doorknobs, all to the tune of the death rattles of tens of hundreds of thousands of starving people. Have a great night. σε πρέπει καλά να το σκεφτείς.